Guys, thanks for joining, Cyan and Chris. I knew that it was something in common that for all of us, we kind of came from like the not right place of the United States. And Cyan's did incredible things in tech, and Chris has done incredible things at NASA, and everyone knows NASA is. So why don't you two kind of introduce yourselves, and then I can take it from there. Cyan, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Cyan Bannister. I'm a venture capitalist. I've been an angel investor or investor for a huge portion of my life. But prior to that, I was an engineer. And prior to that, I was homeless. And so I think that's probably what you're alluding to is that I have a non-traditional background, especially into finance. Like normally when you see people in the finance world, they have MBAs, they went to top tier schools. A lot of my colleagues went to Stanford, Harvard, MIT, and I barely finished the 8th grade. So I think that I was excited about this podcast because I really feel in this discussion, because I really feel there's a lot of people out there that could hear from people like us, and especially so that they know that there is an out, there is a path forward, and we probably have a lot in common as we start talking about as to how we did get out of whatever situations we were in to where we are now. So, but that's me.
Yeah. Great to meet you, Cyan. And just for everybody listening to this is our first meeting, so that's great. I've known Chino probably the last year, just out of the blue, through the pandemic. I think it was sort of an internet connection in which he was, he made some statement like about connecting and whether or not I wanted to continue working where I was, which I thought was like really, when someone has that type of yitzvah, you really kind of lean into them. And, that very, very similar to that, which I really liked about him. And, we started bonding after that. I came from Santa Clarita, California. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. Santa Clarita is about an hour north of LA. And so I grew up there in a mobile home. So my dad lost his business about, we were middle class, and then my dad lost his business when I was about 12 or 13, and we moved in. My grandmother always lived with me. My mother, God rest her soul, and my mother was a schizophrenic. Along with my father, did what he could, but, was one of those gentlemen that left at 6 a.m. and came home at 9 at night. I remember he used to eat cake and pie and drink like a Diet Coke every night for dinner. So I know you can live off of that, although I don't anymore. But that certainly helped me in the tech industry and learned that for a while. When I got to USC and got out of Santa Clarita, I did it on a full scholarship and with a bunch of student loans. And I looked around me, and, I think the thing that we do have in common, as I looked around me and I had big imposter syndrome, I didn't have a BMW, I didn't have whatever, and all the chains and whatever, not that everyone had that, but yeah, that you look around you and then you feel a little out of place. But the thing I think that unites us, that makes us not out of place, is grit, determination, and hard work. And that's what I committed to, and committed myself to. I got a job at NASA. Really didn't know what NASA JPL was. And the joke back then is JPL, like JBL, you mean the headphone company? And, I didn't have that sort of NASA moment until, 3 or 4 years into working there and, seeing the Mars rovers launch and, being part of that. But, I wasn't pre-anointed. I wasn't one of these folks. And I think we all know, people like that, they're the Lannisters or, sorry, you're going to get a bunch of Game of Thrones references because I'm rewatching it right now. And I actually never really watched it the first time. So it's my first time. But yeah, I'm not a Lannister. I'm not a, whatever. But but we are hard workers and we have
at least they pay their debts.
They certainly pay their debts. They do. That is a great point.
The Bannisters do, at least.
You're Bannisters, right? And
yes, our Bannisters.
Same with me. I think so. My parents immigrated to the country. I was lucky. The reason I take these barbell big swing bets, like in terms of starting startups, that's super risky, or angel investing, is because I'm pretty happy to play the game here in the U.S. So my parents are from the Philippines. And during the 80s and 90s, the best talent to import for U.S. nurses, for U.S. hospitals, just happened to be from the Philippines. And so like my mom got a job in Chicago as a nurse. And when she landed, she figured out that she was pregnant with me, which terrified her because you're not supposed to go to a new country and have babies. It's like not, I'm pretty sure it was against like the work policy. And she told me this story, and I was so amazed because it turns out that her boss was super kind to her and kind of helped her navigate the bureaucracy, as well as help her find like a help to not get kicked out of the country while she was pregnant with me. So I was born in Chicago, and the CHI from Chino comes from Chicago. The NO from Illinois comes from, in my name comes from Illinois. And, we grew up in Spokane, Washington, because she found some article that said top 9 places to live in the US. And Spokane was number 1 for whatever reason. And so Spokane, this is not the Washington that Jeff Bezos came from, where it's like Seattle. This is on the border of Idaho. I was one of, like 8 kids in my 2,000 kid high school who graduated that wasn't white or Russian or Mormon or in those categories. And yes, glowing. Yes, exactly. Vampires live in Washington, according to Chris, which I can confirm, actually not. But it was never even made important to me until I was like 19 or 20. I didn't even realize until I was 19 or 20, building my first company, that it was important to go to a good school. And my parents were cleaning out my childhood home and found a letter from Stanford that I received in my junior year of high school. And I had blocked out this memory because I'd never told this story. So Facebook, I had just gotten off MySpace. Facebook just came into the scene. So I posted a status saying, I got a letter from Stanford for a summer program, but I spelt Stanford wrong with a D, STANDFORD. And the top comment was from a friend. We're not friends anymore. He's like, "Do you know how I know you won't get in? You spelled Stanford wrong." And that got like way more likes than my actual post, and I got super insecure. I never replied. However, I think there's a beautiful thing that I personally call gravity, where you kind of attract the people who are supposed to take you to the next level as you level up. And I wanted to know who in your early lives, Cyan or Chris, seemed like that beacon to some other world that you had no idea was important.
You want me to go first?
Just jump in.
Yeah,
just anyone can
go ahead.
Okay, cool.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the first name that pops into my mind is a guy named Chris Collins. I met him when I was on the street, and I did a couple of things to try to help me financially, which is one was to silk screen or spray paint stencils onto shirts. And so I could get, inks and go to people's houses and burn screens and then make, 20 shirts and then go over to the record store and sell them. But I saw this guy walking down the street with something I'd made. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, it's the first time I've seen a customer. Mm-hmm. So I said, "Hey, you." And he turned around and he came back and sat down on the sidewalk with me. And he made me prove that I made it, which I thought was really funny because he didn't believe me. But then he gave me his number. And later on, we became very close friends. We're friends to this day. But he's the first person who showed me a computer and then showed me how to get online. And he was one of these people who kept encouraging me to get into the industry and basically said I was smart enough. And I didn't think that I was, and I didn't think that that world was for me. And so I really, to this day, I thank my lucky stars that I ran into him and that he bought my shirt. Or patch, as it may be. It was a patch.
Were you like a teenager at this time? Like how old were you at this time?
It's about 16, 17.
It's a very transformative in your adolescence. I see that.
Very, very transformational.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that people using kind of what you made, or giving you kind of like a connection, kind of drove you, Cyan, and for me, it was during a time that I was in my early college years, even. I think I had gotten a job at JPL by then, but I was very kind of isolated and alone when I moved away from my, at the time, small town, that had Magic Mountain, Six Flags, but that's all it was known for. And it was basically a dirt, whatever. I think we got a mall when I was like 18 or 17, but, now Santa Clarita is a pretty big suburb, but back then it wasn't. But I moved to LA and I was like, oh my God, amazing. There are people that aren't white here, and the diversity, of just sort of being around, which was really amazing, growing up in Santa Clarita. And I remember while I was there, and also feeling inadequate and also having a job because I basically couldn't do work study anymore because it wasn't enough to kind of support myself. I met a gentleman who was a professor that really inspired me there. And his name was Nenad Medvedovic, or Nino. And he's Serbian. And he was an immigrant, actually, and he was very tall and good at soccer. But the thing I really liked about him was he wasn't one of these older professors that, had sort of, I don't know, what do you call it, tenured, they'd given up, they don't care anymore. He was like a grinder, and he himself, he was in a mixed race marriage. And he had two beautiful kids that basically, because he was estranged from his wife and divorced from her and all this, that he was raising on his own. And, I really related to, this guy who, basically was on his own. He was an immigrant. He had done his last year of high school in Arizona, after coming over from Serbia, and then basically, was really smart, dedicated, worked hard. And he was just one of the most well-spoken people that I knew, which was really interesting given, that the U.S. wasn't sort of his native, place. And that was just blew my mind that even that existed, growing up in Santa Clarita, this inspirational kind of guy, and he's raising his family, he's doing the best that he can. I remember he, would worry about his daughter and her asthma and, all of this. And I would just be like sitting here like, wow, this is amazing, to me that someone, like him, cares and does all these things. And he was advising a bunch of students at the time, and he made time for me. And I was like, look, if this guy could really do all this, and all it took, he's the smartest guy in the room. He still is today. He's the chair of the USC department now, but he never would have thought. He talked about sports. He talked like he grew up in the trailer next to me. And I just, it was really kind of inspiring. And those are the types of people, I agree with you, Sheena, gravity matters, related to that. Those are the types of people that I keep, in my life today.
Sounds like they both of these figures in both your lives respectively saw something in each of you. What do you think that was? Was it something you brought on your sleeve? Were you really charismatic and they're like, oh, this girl would be a great leader, or this person would be a great salesperson? Or were you walking around talking about abstract theories and something else that tipped them off that you were perhaps brighter than your peers?
I think curiosity. I think, the fact that I was even remotely interested in what he did for a living, and that I desperately wanted to be a part of it. And he didn't think that it wasn't, there's a lot of narrative that you hear about people with, especially females in the tech industry, where, they say that they're not encouraged to be in it, but that was not my experience. To have somebody basically say, not only should you be here, but here's everything you need to be here. And, he even took me to the bookstore and he was like, every book you can possibly imagine that explains how the internet works is right here. They're called O'Reilly. They're amazing, and I didn't feel like there was any gatekeeper to this world. Whereas a lot of the other types of professions that I could get into had all these gatekeepers. There was all these, accreditations that you had to have. The fact that I don't even have a high school diploma, if you can imagine navigating that. I couldn't even work at certain restaurants, and at some point it became a badge of honor, and I wouldn't get a GED just because because it was a video game I was playing.
Yeah.
And so I think curiosity would be number one. I think if you're a curious person, it shows in your eyes. And it's also something I look for in entrepreneurs.
Yeah, agency matters to me. And I think that that's a theme, that you kind of hear. I grew up the introvert. I have a brother, And he was the cool guy growing up. He's a year older than me. He's a little taller than me. I grew up, I like to tell people, my dad always talked to my brother because he was a clown and he was dating girls and all these things, growing up and hanging out and smoking and doing whatever, whatever cool people do. And then when I was 16 and my brother was 17 and he moved out the second he could, but laugh on him, although I love my brother. He moved like across the street. So, into an apartment with 5 friends. So it's not like he moved out. But when he moved out, I tell people, then my dad, I think I had the first conversation ever with my father. I'd sit and I'd read the paper, and he, people read the paper back then. And we would talk about, what was in the news. That was like my beginning of kind of coming out of my shell, although I was into sports and I was into things and I played sports a little bit, but I was a big introvert. As I grew older, I became an extrovert. And I think one of the things I meet with a lot of people with our backgrounds, one of the things I see is really capturing that agency and moving towards that sort of at that level. Because like, if no one's ever, and I'm not saying like people that have come from more affluent but I have seen a lot of like, well, I don't need to be an extrovert because things just happen. I showed up at this place and it happened for me. Or of course I have this network of people because that's what, I came from. But then it's like the people that, didn't, it's like, I tell people even to this day, I fight and claw and things matter more. They just mean more, to me. It's kind of like in college football, they say, it just means more to live in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or to play in the SEC, the Southeastern Conference. It just means more. I understand what that, means. There are things that mean more to me, and they do to this day, and so, yeah, I think that lends itself a little to the extroversion. That's certainly what Nino saw in me, someone who wasn't afraid to talk, say the wrong thing or whatever, because I've done it my whole life. And I've had so many people at every level tell me, to this day even, what I can't do or what I'm unable to do or what won't happen, and whatever. And I relish, to this day, not in proving them wrong or whatever, but in really capturing myself and knowing, what I can accomplish. It doesn't matter about them. I play, Cyan, I play the video game too, but it's against myself, And in football, I coached my son and have for years. And I bring the team together when they're worried or they're down or they have some adversity. And I tell them, and they're worried what the other team is doing. I said, they are not here. They don't exist. You're playing against yourself, and that is like the easiest calm down, effect is take everyone else out of the room. You're playing against.
Yeah. And I bet you one of the things we have in common is, anytime somebody buys me dinner, for example, and this is always usually an interesting tell, is I never forget what it was like to buy my friends dinner and be able to save and scrimp for it. And, it's never lost on me, especially when someone, has a different kind of employment, et cetera, and is buying me food. What a big gesture that is. And I think we lose touch with that as you become successful. And I think it's always wise not to. Going back to, some people just don't know any other way. And so they don't know that somebody really had to work hard to do that for you.
Yeah, 100%. The basic needs element of it matters so much. And I'll be the first person too, like whether I'm at a $10,000 dinner or we ate at McDonald's, I'll be the first person to thank that person if they do. And it means, it means something to me because I know where it came from, eating, where Bob's Big Boy once every 3 months was a big deal. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. I remember, my mom would always get these coupons in the mail from Subway, and I grew up in a church. I'm not really religious these days, but we go to church every Sundays and Wednesdays, and we'd go and we eat out and we go to Subway. And, the funny thing is as time goes on and your attention's taken from your work and people in your life, it's easy to lose sight of where you came from. And not that it's a bad thing, but, I did this exercise 3 weeks ago. I read 10 years of journal entries that I've been journaling for 10 years. And the amount of things that I forgot that I really cared about was super humbling. And I wanted to know, for example, I got into tech and entrepreneurship because I did the math. I'm like, well, if I want to be a knowledge worker, I could be a doctor, a lawyer. They both sell their time, not for me. Consulting, I'm not really sure they do to this day. Tech or finance. And, spreadsheets kind of were always lost on me. So I guess it's tech. But the reason I got into it was because my mom was a nurse. So she worked at nights. And my dad was a civil engineer, contract civil engineer. So he worked in a day. So I'd only get one of them at home at a time. And I'm like, I just need to make enough money where I can just spend the most amount of time with my family. And tech seemed like a vehicle to do that. But I had forgotten about those values in my early 20s because I'm like, I'm not thinking about kids or families or whatever. But I had always wanted it since I was 19. What do you guys think your whys were for your paths? Was it challenge? Was it curiosity, Cyan? Was it because you have to be yourself and be more of an extrovert, talking about rockets and stuff, Chris? Or what do you think it was?
So for me, it was basically figuring out what this game called life really is all about. And, I think it's the human question, which is, why am I here? What is my purpose? I think we all ask ourselves that question at some point or another. And some people, unfortunately, go to a place of darkness when they ask themselves that question. And I go to a place of curiosity. And I've turned my whole life into a game. And this is a game I only play with myself. The rules are set by me every day. And I have my own lines that I have to cross. And so I just realized when I was younger, to go back to my situation, I became a ward of the state and basically was forced to live on my own with no notice. So basically I went from, having a mother to being like, you've got to find a place to live in 24 hours or we're putting you in a girls' home situation. And you have a choice there to sit there and cry and sit there and decide that you're a victim and this is horrible. Look what's happening to me. And instead I was like, wow, this is a brand new slate. I can figure this out. I think I can.
Yeah.
And so that was my first game, was like figure out housing. And then it was like figure out how to make enough money to pay the rent once I got a place, and figure out how the trash gets taken out, and figure out how to get electricity. And once you start treating everything like it's a fun game, life gets a lot more interesting. And so I think I figured out what the purpose of my life is. And I think it's everybody's is different. And I think by challenging yourself and having these internal dialogues and being introspective, you can figure out what this game is that you're supposed to play. But everyone's playing a game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would very much kind of resonate with that, Cyan. For me, I want to address like the game element because I think you and I really relate on that, but I'll kind of tackle it from a different perspective. Chino, this is back to you. I tell people I'm driven by laziness, so for me, and I also make the worst version of everything, but I do the first worst version. I don't make the optimal anything. I'm not the algorithm guy who's going to drive product efficiency down by 50% or up by 50% and drive the, costs down. But I'm going to be the guy that kind of sees some weird abstract thing, that no one's working on that just really matters to me. And it's part of the gamification, part. And I'm going to write the first version of it and I'm never going to do it again. And when I do it, and when I do that, and I'm all about motivational types of things, like how do we, and so in my career, I really got into sensors and data systems and, all this at NASA because we just grew up in a time in which everything around, everyone became a sensor. It was during kind of the iPhone era where, everyone had an iPhone, and NASA was the same way. Their instruments, they started taking these massive amounts of pictures and they started collecting these massive, whether they be of Mars, my background, or, other earth science and things like that. And the amount of data that they were collecting, just like on your iPhones, instead of uploading them to social media, NASA had to keep it around. Their core value was data and giving it to the public for free. And so I grew up in this era of basically people kind of being well, we can't, just throw it away in the Indiana Jones archive anymore. We got to do something with it, And And oh, by the way, instead of a single crate with the Ark of the Covenant, there's 50,000 Arks of the Covenant now, and we got to get it out to everybody. And so for me, the first part of my career was sort of centered around, being around these like brilliant people, listening and learning. I do a lot of that. And that's sort of one of my core tenets today. I don't like to be the person that talks the most in the room, but as soon as you give me the platform, I'm going to get my point across. But you can't just sit there and dominate the conversation all the time. You got to do a lot of listening. Well, I'm good at listening. And then when I do, sort of take it all in and then basically say what we should do next. But when I say what we should do next, it's not like, what are we going to do next? And again, like drive efficiency. It's going to be, here, I'll show you the first version. Now you go take it and replicate it, and that's sort of one of my core tenets, and so it is. And I've really thought deeply about this. It's laziness. And I think it's the inherent software architect in me, data architect, whatever. But not everyone is like that. Some people and I think this is the drive why I never fully went into commercial industry. And then, I'd sit on a bunch of advisory boards, whatever. I've been in commercial industry. I know all the people like you guys too that are in there. We all work and walk in the same circles. But one of the things is I think it's really driven over there by, optimizing and that kind of core efficiency. And I could care less, to be honest, about that. I mean, it's great. I know it has to drive, profits and other things, but I would rather just do the first of a kind thing and then just, never do it again and and then open source it and give it to other people and, whatever, and let them.
I would argue that maybe instead of laziness, you're insatiable.
I like that. That's a better, it's definitely a better adjective. It's a cooler adjective.
Yeah, I think you're insatiable. I think the reason why is because I have the exact same thing that I do in a different sector, but I call myself a sprinter, not a marathon runner. But when I was working in operations in various companies, they would put me on special projects, and I would come in. They called me the cleaner. I would come in and fix an organization, but then I didn't want to stay. It was like, I don't want to run this thing forever. I don't want to retire and do this. Like, I want out. And so a good operator would see that in me and basically place me in different departments and allow me to find the person who wants to be there, right? So it's really interesting that you found us both and me are so common, have so much in common, but it's actually right. I really think I love knowledge and I love learning. And so that's why I think it's more like an insatiable appetite for trying novelty and new things and being able to do that in such a way that people like, it's great that NASA understands that about you.
Yeah. And if you were to ask me what I was reading, as people tell me this, or just whatever, and not that you have to be on one of these shows or have these friends. I just want to, for anyone listening to this, like, oh, if you didn't read 10 books, today, don't beat yourself up, or this week or this month or what, what's not on Twitter or what's, just something, let's have a conversation. And then when they ask me that, sometimes I'll tell them, well, I'm really into foreign policy or I'm really into XYZ. And they're like, what the hell, Chris? Especially my dear friends. They're like, you didn't care about any of that, growing up, like, let's talk about football or let's talk about, something, or someone's family or how their kids are doing. And I'm like, no, I'm actually kind of so similar to you, Cyan. It's like, I kind of go where I never really got or learned about some of these things growing up. I mean, when I went through high school, I went to a decent high school and whatever and yada, yada. But I never cared about it. I mean, I played video games, which is so funny because my kids are into video games now. And my son, he's like, Dad, did you used to play video games? And I was like, that's all I did growing up besides sports. So I could care less about the new version of GTA or Fortnite. I mean, I'm not like, I have a lot of friends in the video game industry and I hope if any of them are listening to this, I'm not saying your games suck or whatever. I just don't play them anymore, because I spent decades doing this where and I kind of beat myself up a little because I was like, I wish I would have read more. I wish I would have, learned. So now I'm just, I'm in my 40s and I spend a lot of time doing that now. And I actually totally track with what you're saying, Cyan. I just search for things that are interesting to me. I've managed to set it up in life now, which is my true blessing and purpose, to just keep learning and being kind of a lifelong learner and going after what my, interests are, which are everything. Frankly, it could be one day foreign policy, and in 2 months I could read a great book on how to start a restaurant and learn something from it, and there's so much to learn from.
Yeah, this world has endless possibilities.
So it sounds like, it's like,
that's why I never understand boredom. I don't understand boredom.
I agree. I agree because I think people they get too sweet about. Look, there's a font. There's the balance between like compounding interest, which is said to be very powerful, and chasing losses. Like what is that? Where you kind of, do you know what I'm talking about? It's um, something bias, something to the degree of like sticking with what you already stuck with, and because you already stuck with it, you think sticking with it will get you to the next thing. But I think we undervalue the value of change. And both of you, more so Cyan, it seems like you've gone through a lot of change in your career. What I wanted to know, Cyan, selfishly, is like, you were a technologist and then a founder for like 10 years of your company, Zividi, if I'm saying that right. And then, what do you think got you to being a partner at Founders Fund? Was it the curiosity? Was it you were interested in VC and you just happen to know these folks and show them how smart you were and or did you do it the old fashioned way where it's like, I angel invested in 10 great companies or 20 great companies, like, please give me a seat at the table to be a steward of this capital. What I'm getting at here is what got you to the next thing and what made you see the next thing as, I'm going to go deep on that. And I want to spend the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years of my life on that.
Yeah, so I started a company called Zividi, you did say it right, which the company today that would be the closest example would be OnlyFans. And so we invented crowdfunding for a specific type of content called pinup photography. Now it's adult-oriented content, but it was a very specific niche. And, Patreon and Kickstarter came after that. And so we really innovated in the space, but we were too early. And so I learned a big lesson, which is you could have the best idea in the world, but enter the market at the wrong time. The iPhone started, basically came out towards the end of all of this. By the time I launched this, it was, the MySpace days, going back to MySpace. But one of the interesting things about being a founder is it got me into a lot of rooms that I was previously closed off to. And so Zividi opened a lot of doors for me because people were so interested in what we were doing. What we were doing was innovative. And I was able to pitch at different, startup pitch competitions where companies in our category were typically not allowed. And, it also, because I am a fighter and I'm playing a video game, I'm not one to easily shy away or back down from challenge, and I managed to pick a startup industry that's really complicated and very, very tough from a, monetization standpoint, like working with credit card processors to, you name it, it's riddled with problems. And so I was a better investor than I was an operator, to be honest with you. Going back to the marathon runner, that's when I had the core realization, like, I'm a sprinter. My job is to start things and pass them off and pass the torch to someone else. When I started Zividi, I had a co-founder who was the CEO. And then when he left, I ended up, being the CEO. And that was not by design. That was not what I wanted. And ultimately was not good for the company. And so, but it did teach me what to look for in founders, which I think, lent itself to making me better at that occupation. The thing I love about investing is I can roll up my sleeves and get in the weeds with an entrepreneur. And then an hour, let's say we're talking about sandwich delivery. And then an hour later, I'm talking to someone who's working on payroll tax software. And then an hour later, the variation of it really just scratches this itch that we were talking about of learning. Mm-hmm. And so it allows me to constantly learn about different sectors. And how I got into these deals was, again, curiosity. I don't believe that in sort of a tit for tat way of thinking, like if I go to something, I have to get something out of it. I believe that the universe gives us what we need. And if I'm just a good person and I behave like a good person and I'm a good person in the world, giving off positive energy, positive things happen. It's just that simple. Yeah. And I would like to say it's some kind of genius or something like that, but I really honestly think it's a way of life.
Yeah.
And because I believe that, it's interesting, like abundance happens.
Yeah.
It's just because I'm, you know, I try to be a good person. I try to be good to other people.
I actually think that that's deterministic. So I think, I think it's actually too simple to say that that's, by the way, I ascribe to that too, and that same way of life. And sometimes, I would say, like, I'm definitely not one of those people that believes like we die and just, nothing happens, but I wouldn't say, I'm not in church every day. And, I believe there's some type of God, but I don't know, there's lots of like interesting relationships between different cultures and their, depiction of what God or gods are, and, whatever. Right. But I certainly was raised to believe in God and Jesus, the Christian faith and all that. But, long story short, the reason I'm talking about this is that I believe that those principles and even your acts like that you do, in your day-to-day life, like I think are part of like a big Lego game in the universe. And I think like you move the little holes in certain ways and into place when you do that so that you're ready to receive a Lego block that otherwise wouldn't have smushed into you if you didn't do that. So I actually think that is more deterministic than we give it credit for, because, I hear a lot of people, it's like, oh, bad things happen to me. And then like, I hear them talk shit about people, do this, do that. And I'm like, well, your Lego block, the little hole thing is not in the right place because you're doing that. And so you can't receive and you can't get the, XYZ, that, and that's just, I truly believe that. If that's a religion, that's the one I want to subscribe.
I mean, if I had a religion, that's what it is. It's, you get back what you put out, and whatever you take, you must put back. And so it's one of these things where if I take someone time, maybe I can't give it back to them, but I can give it to someone else, and why I say yes to opportunities like talking on this, because I really feel like I don't know what's going to come of this, but I know that I want to help Gino, and I really want to help the people that are listening to this. And I think it's a cool idea, and so that's how I operate. I don't sit and think it through. I just like, does this feel right? Does it spark joy? Does it help humanity? Yes, I'm in. That's kind of my guiding light.
It was so out of thin air because I sent out the bat signal saying, guys, I'm starting a YouTube channel and this is what I want to talk about. And again, in the supply and demand of tech conversations, there's so much tactical stuff out there on how to start a company and how to raise money and how to scale companies and what that's like. And I'm like, guys, people in tech have souls. I don't know if you knew this, but people in tech have souls. And we know after Cyan responded, I immediately thought of you, Chris, because I'm like, hold on, wait. I came from a little ass town, and like I'm starting to come into these new clubs, like this new season 2 of clubs. Like I'm in Creator now. I was in On Deck. I was in Launch House, and that's a different story. But I'm like, wait, why does any of this matter? It really does. It doesn't really matter. And what it really matters is like inputs and outputs. And it was so organic because Cyan responded, and I'm like, what are we gonna talk about? I'm like, oh, Chris, me, Cyan, we all like don't have that gold star. And it's funny because like I fucking refuse to believe that there's something that will not, like, that'll stand in between me and my success. That's not me. Like when something doesn't pan out, I'm like, oh, I fucked up in these major ways, or I didn't have the right team, or there was some discrepancy in my plan. I get that. Something I picked up from a Ben Horowitz podcast like 6 years ago. I learned in sound bites, and this is a sound bite. He goes, his mentor, an African American male, prolific investor, he had asked them. He goes, "Hey, doesn't it bother you that everyone in this industry is white and comes from these schools or whatever?" And his response is beautiful, and it was this: if you keep looking for monsters under your bed, you will find them. And whenever I think about coming short in some way, I'm like, and my reaction towards it, I go, am I looking for monsters in my bed? Am I looking for monsters in my bed? And I've been pretty proud of myself to say that I'm not. And how I kind of react to that, usually a shortcoming, is hyper focus on a funnel of more opportunity. So it's like, if I don't get, a hire, I will. It's not because I missed that one hire. it's because I didn't have 20 behind them who were just as good. How was your guys' reaction to shortcomings, maybe related to not being in the right place or whatever?
Can I point out something that you just said that I want to
Please.
highlight, though, that I think is so important, which is accountability. You know, there's a lot of people that, and I'm not going to throw shade at it because I think it's more of a learned, you know, habit, a pattern that they need to break. You know, when things are going wrong, they tend to blame externalities rather than to try to figure out what their role was to play in it. And I think that if you can take radical self-accountability for the mistakes you make, it makes you a happier, better person. And I know it's hard because at first it's like to even like accept that you messed up is hard, but it makes everybody else softer around you. You know, sometimes I even take blame for things that I'm not even responsible for. And because I just know it's the better thing to do for everybody in the room sometimes. And I know that that's weird to say, but it was remarkable that you brought that up because I think that's one of the things that can really increase your opportunities is if you can quickly move past this cycle of guilt and suffering and into the world of opportunity, then I think that's a beautiful thing. But I cut you off. You're about to ask a question.
No, I thank you for saying that, by the way. Yeah, because accountability sucks. It hurts, right? Like to say that I messed up in a major way. And then I don't know if you guys have siblings, but I remember getting in arguments with my siblings and then realizing, yeah, that was my fault. And then you admit that it's your fault, and then the weight is lifted off your shoulders. Like you're kind of a new person. And I realized that a lot in business and investing too. It's like we lost the money. Why did we lose the money? Oh, that we had poor judgment. Yeah, the question sign was in terms of change and a trait that you think people who come from the same place as we come from. What do you think is something that people can prioritize in their attention or their actions that will serve them the most? I'll go first. So the first one for me is enthusiasm. I think when people know you're excited about something, it's very hard unless you're sociopathic to see you go like this and then be flat. Once you figure out you're excited about something and communicate that, it like again goes back to that gravity of people being attracted to go with you on that thing or to help you on that journey. And that was talked to me by someone on the Tim Ferriss podcast, who we'll talk about later. But Cyan, I think you were going to go.
Yeah, I think I'm not particularly good at this. This is a skill that this is a muscle I am training right now, but intentionality. So I've lived a life of almost pure randomness by design. And I am now learning what it's like to be intentional. And if you can combine the two, I know that sounds really weird, but if you can be intentionally random, it's actually quite special. And so that's something that I'm personally working on and growing as a skill that I think that makes you more present as a person. You know, if you're wandering to the fridge and you open the fridge and you're eating stuff out of it and you don't know why, there was no intention behind it. But if you wander to the fridge and you have that intention before you get there, you know exactly what you're going there for. And I think that it really changes life when you start to evaluate every decision that you make. And was it on autopilot or was it something you really wanted to do? And so I've realized there's a lot of things that are on autopilot for me that don't serve me anymore. They don't serve anybody. So I think that's something that founders and investors should think about, which is what sort of habits do you have that just no longer suit you anymore? That could make you a more superhuman if you got rid of them. So I think it's more of a less is more kind of thing, because I've always been a maximalist. So I'm trying out minimalism and I'm seeing like how it goes.
I love that. I love both of your recommendations. So enthusiasm, less is more, minimalism. I'll add succeeding at every level. And there's a reason that I say that. And I think a lot of folks want to take leaps above steps, even myself. And so you see it, I mean, Cyan, you talked about, you're glad that you had the experience of being a CEO, and you learned things and you took things away, but that's not what you want to do. You know, you like founding and, you know, stuff like that, but you're glad you had the experience, because if you ever needed to do that again, which in this weird complexity of life, you will, I'm guessing, maybe it's going to happen again. You know, Chino, you're going to go to a team where, you know, your investments aren't going to pan out, or you're going to make the wrong hire, or, you know, whatever. It's going to happen again. But you've done this before. You succeeded at every level. So when the time comes for whatever the next steps with you, I guess buy Twitter, or, you know, whatever that, you know, maybe that's your next step, but buy a big social media company. I don't know, but whatever it is, you'll be ready for it. And so, but so many people I meet, you know, are like, well, you know, I could do that, or I want to do that. And I say, you know, it's almost like that. Do you know what they did to get there, and not just assume that they got there type of deal? You know, like, and I meet so many people and that don't do it. Or even people that like don't want to make the 1 to 10 step jump, but even people that, and I've done this myself, where I want to make the 2-step jump or the whatever jump. And you need to make the 1-step jumps, and you need to let the tides rise around you. And they need not to be jumps. They need to just be walks, you know, because the tide has risen for that, you know? And so that's a big thing. I'll share one more. You get one for free too. My other one is gratitude, not grievance. And I tweet that all the time for myself. There's a lot of grievances we could all have. And I think this almost unifies the 3 of our comments. But there's a lot of grievances. We got to let them go. And I do this, you know, and part of the grievances are due to accountability. You know, what you know, contributed towards whatever thing you don't like and or whatever. If you can have accountability, you can let go. Too many people want to cancel everything nowadays instead of just letting go. And, you know, gratitude, not grievance. That's my +1 for free.
I love that. I give this advice all the time too, because a lot of people want to just jump the line. And I'm like, look, you know, I crawled so that some people can walk, but that doesn't mean you get to skip it. And you have to do some of the steps along the way. You know, I slept under a desk, worked at a startup, you know, read every book instead of going out and partying with my friends. And sometimes you just can't skip that. And instead of thinking it as a bad thing, think of it as a world of wonder. You know, every little thing can be absolutely magical if you want it to be. You know, it's all a matter of perception.
100%.
What do you guys think are your big? So we're coming on time here, but I wanted to get some fortune cookie length wisdom from each of you. What do you think is the biggest perspective shift you've had in the last 2 to 5 years? That includes COVID. That has most impacted your life. I'll go first, really fast. I was on a 12-minute motorcycle ride to lunch in Hawaii in late July, and I was like, "Well, it's 12 minutes. I don't wear my helmet." But life happens really fast. I got hit by a car, slid 20 feet, broke 3 ribs, stitches in my head, and you know, it was very cliche. When I was in the MRI machine, I was thinking about my family, my friends, you know, my relationships. And after that, I'm like, I need to zoom in and cut the fat off, because I used to give my time away like fucking candy. You know, I just like networked with everybody. Pizza, beer, sure. Pizza and beer, sure. You know, wine and cheese, whatever. But now I'm like, again, it's intentional, but it is random, because I am shooting blanks in every direction. But it's in like this category of creation, and right now it's like fintech and world globalization. I'm really big on Africa, really big on Latin America. So the TLDR, my fortune cookie, is zoom in on what really matters and be less generous with your time. I know it sounds like kind of cynical, but that's mine for like the last like 2 to 5 years.
I love that. I have been working on that. I'm going to say, I hate to say the same, but it's been the most revolutionary thing that's happened to me in the past few years. I had a stroke 4 or 5 years ago, and I thought I got the lesson that you got, but I didn't. What happens is you think you get the lesson, but I call it going back to sleep. You wake up and you're like, oh, I got the lesson, but then you're like, go back into your old habits. And so I actually cut out a lot of what you call fat which I call sorrow and suffering, and or things that cause sorrow and suffering, including people filling up your calendar when you don't want it filled up, etc. And I realized I was in complete control of all of it. And so once I realized that and I let it go, I had these profound experiences that I can't even describe in the next few minutes. But happiness, like you cannot believe. Deeper relationships with my friends, better, a more enjoyable time working, etc. I think you have to set boundaries and you have to cut out what doesn't serve you anymore, and doesn't usually serve the other people as well.
I'll try and tie both. I got almost minimalism and also prioritizing oneself and what you do. With Cyan, I got doing that, but even kind of taking it a step further, and maybe combining intentionality with that, as well, and not, doing the same patterns again. Now I'll tie it to the physical world, in order to do all, and yours is definitely a physical world, but actually I meant your physical self. I couldn't do I had to do all of that, what you guys just said, in order to literally lose 100 pounds. And it matters. My life has fundamentally changed. I physically lost 100 pounds in the year leading up to 2020. And I since practiced and employed the same things, that go along with it. I used to stress eat. I ate, I was like the dad. My wife put on less weight than I did, during her pregnancies, and that combined with everything else that I was trying to do with just not taking care of myself and thinking I was still 20 made a big difference. And so whereas I think during the pandemic and everyone's sort of self-reflection on their health, I had done that 2 years before, in leading up to it. And it made the last couple of years not go by easy because of the mental health and everything that still matters. And, the relationships that were made more difficult to maintain by Zooms, but they were in some other ways made easier to maintain by that. That matters. I think people are still ignoring their physical health today. And that, I would encourage you want to be a successful tech founder, or anyways, just a successful human being. And I'm not saying, lots of people are predispositioned. I'm not excluding all them. And, lots of people have a hard lift or where they live or the food economy or the government, all the shit that happens with that. And I'm aware of it growing up in a trailer and knowing that, there's 22 McDonald's next to me, but there's not a good food store. So I get that. But if you can, in any way, just even do simple things, exercise, spend 20 minutes a day doing that, meditate, do whatever. It will make a difference in your work life. They are not separate. You can't ignore one and be successful at the other. You can for a little bit, but that time.
Yeah, it's borrowed.
Very much so.
It will
very
catch
much
up.
So.
Trust me.
Guys, one day I'll have a studio and a stage and be like the next Letterman. But for now, I'm just a guy on Zoom with two friends. And I had a ton of fun on this conversation. And thank you so much for joining me.
This is fantastic. This is where it all starts.
I know this is where it all starts.
Right.
This is the flag.
Episode one.
Exactly. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys so much for joining and sharing some of your thoughts and your wisdom and your heart. So I really appreciate it.
I can't wait to help you promote your channel and to spread the word about what you're doing. So just let us know how we can help. And, I'm filled with gratitude to be one of your
Likewise.
first guests.
And looking forward to doing this when it all when the stars align for us in person for episode 150. So
Absolutely.